now 10:01 Eastern time, and yeah, so 9 a.m. Central time. So good morning, everyone in kind of the west part of the world, and probably good afternoon or good night to the people on the east side. Today, Colin and I are going to kind of moderate the meeting together. So Colin, please go ahead and kind of see how we want to start. Colin, we do not hear you.
Okay.
Thank you. All right. Technical challenge. Well, thank you all for coming. Thanks mostly to Hamed for all the work he's put into organizing all of us as a group. I think we all recognize that he's doing a tremendous effort here, so wanted to thank you kind of publicly. We were talking before the meeting about the goals to achieve, and I think we both agree that potentially the most important value that this has is to just get to know each other and to see each other's faces and to hear how they live and what they work on. So Ahmed, if you agree, maybe we could just kind of go along and introduce ourselves.
Sounds great. So,
okay.
Colin, do you want to start?
Yeah, I'll start. So my name is Colleen Hanlon. I'm in South Carolina at the Medical University of South Carolina. I work in the same division as Mark George, who some of you may know. And I do brain stimulation, brain imaging, in many different populations with addiction. So cocaine users, alcohol users, smokers, and we're doing a little bit of opiates because that's the word of the day. So yeah, that's what I do.
Okay, good. And my name is Hamed Ektiari, and I work at Laureate Institute for Brain Research in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And what I do basically, I run clinical trials using tES, tES among meth users and opioid users in combination with fMRI. So basically, I combine tES and fMRI together. That's my kind of basic interest, and we have done different things in this combination. So that is my kind of basic interest, and I have been kind of born and raised in Iran. So I have a clear idea about the China kind of Canadian conflict, that because the other side is the Iranian side, because the relationship between kind of Huawei kind of company in Iran that made those. So I have a kind of understanding about that, and I have been involved in kind of running the brain stimulation trials in Iran as well. So I have a kind of bilateral in terms of being able to do things in Iran and also in the US. So I have kind of a sense of being able to do things in different parts of the world. So that is my kind of initial background. Julie, do you want to go ahead?
All right, so I'm Shirley Tecto. I'm in Quebec City in Canada. I used to be in Alvaro Leone's lab at the INTAM. We used to do GS, CS a little bit, and RTMS, mainly for smoking cessation. We submitted a grant for marijuana because cannabis has been now legal in Canada. That's our country. So we'll see if we get funding for that. And I also combine it with brain imaging, spectroscopy and TMS. And again, more proof of concept studies also here.
Awesome. Ali Reza, do you want to go?
Hi, I'm Ali Reza. I working on tES and somehow addiction. I can say implicit cognitive function like attentional bias or something like this, and craving. I had some work with Hamed, and actually I have this honor. I was a student of Hamed, and after that I worked with Professor Nietzsche in Leibniz, Dortmund. But recently I moved to Netherlands, and I hope I can have better project and works here in future.
Awesome. Javier, do you want to go ahead?
Me?
Yes, please.
Xavier, oh, you hear me?
Yeah, yeah.
Xavier, my name is Xavier Noël. I'm from University Libre de Bruxelles in Belgium. And I'm working a lot right now on decision making along a neurocomputational axis. I'm going to explain you a little bit more our work through an ongoing research we are conducting. My target populations are smokers and alcoholics.
Awesome. Dr. Zhang.
Okay, it's me.
Yes.
Okay. Nice to meet you again. And this is the second time we have the meeting. And my name is Xiaochu Zhang, and I come from the University of Science and Technique of China. And my major is cognitive neuroscience. So my field is I'm working on the addiction, the neural basis of addiction with the fMRI, EEG, and TTCS and TES, some issues. And we work on the decision making and how the addiction to influence the decision making process. And we also use the TTCS and some TSS to try to regulate the craving in the smoker and the internet addiction. That's all. Thank you.
Awesome. Salvatore.
Okay, hi. Do you hear me? Yeah. So I'm Salvatore Campanella, and I'm a colleague of Xavier Noël at the University of Brussels in Belgium. We have a short slide later to explain you more our work, but I'm mainly interested by addiction and mainly recently detoxified alcoholic patients. And my main topic is to try to find some neural markers, event-related potentials, EEG markers of relapse or abstinence in these patients by tagging specific cognitive functions like attentional bias or inhibition, for instance.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Tifei.
So hi, I'm Tifei. So I'm from Shanghai Mental Health Center. And so basically we do both animal and human studies. Animal part, we do a lot of brain slice recording, electrophysiology, and static plasticity. And human part, we try to use TMS to measure the cortical plasticity. And we also use TMS and TDCS to treat different type of addiction patients. And later I will share a little bit of our work.
Awesome. People from NIH NIDA.
Yes, good morning. I'm Vaughn Steele. We're here representing Elliot Stein at NIDA. This is Betty Jo Salmeron. We do several different TMS studies. Mine is using ITBS as a treatment for cocaine use disorder, using MRI then to measure any neuromodulation with the chronic TMS application. We have several other studies in the works are ongoing with TMS in smokers or TDCS in smokers. And so we're trying to represent that whole thing.
Awesome. And your colleague?
Yeah, I'm Betty Jo Salmeron. I work closely with the same projects. Yeah.
Great. Martin.
Hello, everybody. I'm from Germany, from Würzburg. We are using TDCS and TMS stimulations, and we did some studies with smokers and alcohol-dependent patients. And one topic is the combination with psychotherapy, also with anxiety disorder patients. So that's my background.
Great. Vincent.
Hello everybody, I'm a professor of neuroscience in France, in the University of Franche-Comté. I'm working on TDCS, especially on animal model of TDCS on addiction-related behaviors. And I will present later in a few minutes some of our results. So I will explain that in a few minutes.
Awesome. David.
Hi, I'm David Spiegel from Stanford. I collaborate with Nolan Williams, who's on an airplane to New Haven at the moment, couldn't join us. We study hypnosis and its effect on ability to manage pain. And with Nolan, we're collaborating on a study of using TMS to enhance hypnotic responsiveness. Not everybody's hypnotizable, and so we have some evidence that stimulation at the DLPFC can affect the DACC and may enhance hypnotic ability to control pain, and so we're using that as part of treatment for opioid withdrawal.
Great. So we have kind of attendees right now in the meeting that we do not have their video. So we assume that those who basically do not turn on their videos, they don't like to be seen or introduce themselves. So that is our initial assumption. So if you like to kind of, introduce yourself, please turn on your video. You basically have the option to just kind of click on the video button and turn on your video, and it will be nice. Then we can kind of have your introduction as well. So we will wait for a few seconds to see if somebody is interested to come out of the dark and just introduce him or herself. So that is no pressure. So it's just if you like, this we can, and yeah, we will be happy to also have people.
Yeah, maybe if somebody doesn't have a webcam but they want to introduce themselves, you feel free to go ahead and do that too.
Sure. Hi, that's my situation. I'm Dr. Michael Wesley, University of Kentucky, Director of the Neurobehavioral Systems Lab. Colleen serves as a co-mentor on a KO1 I have. We do electrical stimulation and TMS in combination with clinical pharmacology techniques. So the administration of drugs to change cognitive functioning, and then using magnetic stimulation as a potential intervention on that interaction. And we also are interested in more complex and dynamic decision-making processes. So we use probabilistic reinforcement learning models and have a couple of other grants using these same techniques in both cocaine addiction and opiate addiction.
Awesome. So let's move forward for the next step. So Colin, do you want to kind of go ahead and kind of give people an idea about what we have done for the consensus paper and what we might do? I will continue on what you will present in terms of what we have been kind of doing together in terms of kind of running for having a consensus paper together.
Yeah, of course. So a few of us that kind of part of the initial group that organized INTAM have come together and started contributing to a consensus paper. This is in no way meant to be exclusive, by the way. It's just kind of we just sort of started it. And if you've ever been involved in creating some type of consensus paper with a lot of different people and a lot of different labs with a lot of different modalities, it's super hard to do. So what we've been trying to do is kind of set up a framework. You know, if one aspect that unifies all of us on this call is that we're interested in brain stimulation and we're interested in addiction. And very few, or if any of us, are experts in both of them. And so we all need a little help in one domain or the other. And so what we are trying to do is kind of aggregate sort of best practices information in brain stimulation. So things that many of us know, like how to, what are the primary dependent measures? Reporting your resting motor threshold or your active motor threshold, including a good sham, those kind of things, and sort of basic brain stimulation, good practices. And then also uniting that with information that we know from substance use metrics. So what are the primary dependent measures somebody would look for in, let's say, an study or smoking cessation study? What are good control variables to look at? And what kind of elements should be reported in a given paper? So you can imagine that this is a really hard task to do. And Ahmed, again, from a leadership perspective, has done an outstanding job kind of creating an outline and then having a lot of us contribute in various ways. So that's been great. I think if some of you are familiar with the Rossi paper from in brain stimulations, it was a consensus paper that has been updated every few years. And actually the group that created, it was a Siena meeting, the group that created the original Rossi paper meets on a somewhat regular basis. In Siena, I mean, we have people all over the world here. Maybe you want to invite us to your beautiful homes. And they've kind of revised the guidelines over time. And so what I would envision for this sort of first paper is that we just kind of put a feeler out there, and then in the future, maybe all of us can try to kind of come together, or even using kind of web conferencing to update that paper as new data comes out, as we have new refinements, better dependent measures. Expect that the institutes, at least the NIH, but also probably Health Canada and other international organizations will be investing more in neuromodulation. So if we can kind of provide some of a foundation or the scaffolding that could be used to design future trials or things, I think that would be a great service to the field.
Exactly. Great. So I'm going to give you kind of a really short overview about what we have done so far. So let me share my screen, and I'm going to show you what we already have here for the paper. So can you see my screen right now?
Yes.
Okay, so just this is kind of the version that we merge different comments from different authors. So it's pretty much a busy version, but just to give you an idea about what we have done so far in terms of, let me just change the view to this. Okay, what we have done so far for the outline, we have kind of a section regarding the general methodological parameter space for TMS and tES and the technical details for that. So as you can see, people have been kind of making different comments about what are the things that are needed to be technically added to those comments. And then we have parts regarding the kind of mechanisms and how these things are technically interacting with each other, and different parts regarding the methodological issues. And then we have a specific part regarding about the published literature that we have in the field in terms of the recent publications that we have in the field, and all the kind of we have something like 50 published trials with TMS studies, and we have 34 published trials with TDCS. And we kind of explored those publications in terms of kind of their distribution across the world, and what people have tried to do, and what are the targets that people try to use in their studies in kind of with different protocols, with different TMS or TDCS, or in different sorts of kind of even different sort of TMS protocols. So we try to provide an outline for that, and the timing of the stimulation, different sort of. So we will basically provide an overview about what we already have in the field, and even different types of outcome measures that people across the world used for their kind of addiction trial. So we provide an idea about what is the current status of the publications in the field. So that is another section inside the INTAM consensus paper. And then we discuss about, basically, that is the Collins kind of part that she will discuss about that today, in terms of the outcome measures. What are the clinical targets and outcome measures that we have for substance use disorder? So we discussed about different sorts of cue reactivity, craving, abstinence measures, different sorts of measures that people might be interested to consider as outcome measures. And then some other technical details in terms of how different contextual treatments and comorbidities might interact with what we have in terms of the TES, TMS effects on treatment outcome. And then having parts regarding details regarding comorbidities, and then so some kind of specific perspectives on how other addictive behaviors might also be interesting in this field regarding pathological gambling and other disorders related to kind of addictive behaviors. So we have some other kind of smaller sections regarding laterality. I mean, what would be the right or left stimulation? What we already know about laterality in brain stimulation, and then discussions about dosage and what we have, what we know and what we like to be considered as a dosage of interventions. And then we have a specific section on the preclinical studies that probably would be interesting for, I mean, we already have people inside for different labs that are doing preclinical animal studies in this field. And then biomarkers, what are the biomarkers that might be interesting in the field, and some quality standards for designing and reporting clinical trials. So you can see it as a kind of a comprehensive attempt to be able to bring different things. And then we have a specific section on safety. And Shirley leads that part in terms of how we might be able to consider specific safety issues for brain stimulation among substance users. That is the other part of the paper, and some advancements in technologies, and then some ideal scenarios for collaboration and sharing platforms. So that is the structure of the paper. That I'm not sure if, I mean, most of those who are already inside the webinar, they have received a copy of the paper. So, and if there is anybody in among our audience that has not received any kind of the draft from the consensus paper, you definitely would be welcome to join us and kind of add your comments and ideas to be one of the contributing authors to the consensus paper. So it would be kind of, the doors are still open for having others to join. So that is one of the specific kind of outcomes that we expect to have been published kind of in the next coming potentially months. But we hope that the final result would be something that would be helpful. And as Colin mentioned, that it would be great if we can, in long term, we can update that every, let's say, 4 years, 5 years together, and have a kind of an updated version to see how things are moving forward. Because kind of recently we can see some kind of positive and negative studies. So it would be, I mean, I'm really excited to see how things would be different in 4 or 5 years from now. So this is kind of an overview about what we are doing for the kind of INTAM consensus paper. With most of the people, I mean, in the room right now, they have been contributing to that. So that is a great experience of doing these things together. So is there any specific question regarding the consensus paper?
Where are you thinking of publishing it?
We have been discussing to kind of submit that for brain stimulation. But if there is any other suggestion, I mean, we have received some other kind of potential targets for that. But if you have any specific, David, if you have a specific idea for that, we definitely would be happy to consider that as well. Any other question? Okay, great. So now we move forward for the next step. Actually, we kind of two of our speakers at kind of the last part of the meeting, they had kind of emergencies in the last minute, so they are not going to join us. Flavio and Katie are not going to join us, so we have a kind of more relaxed timing in the first part of the webinar. So I mean, I try to keep the meeting really on time, but I mean, if you can see that we are something like 6 minutes behind the schedule, that is the main reason I'm considering that kind of cancellations in the presentation. So I'm kind of distributing that time among other speakers to be able to have more time to discuss about the things that they are going to present. So for the next part, as Colin mentioned, that one of the major kind of things that we really like to have in this networking activity, in this kind of network, is just having people across the world to introduce what they do and letting us know what things are moving forward in other countries, and what are the potentials in across the world for for even joint collaborations in the future. So that is one of the main reasons that we kind of sit together and explore potentials. Today, we have people from different continents that are going to present what they are doing in the field. So the first speaker in this line would be Salvatore and Javier. They are going to present what they are doing. And Salvatore, I can give you the kind of the screen to present your slides.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if you are going to share your screen or Javier is going to. Are you going to share your screen, Javier, or Salvatore? Which
I will try
okay,
to
good.
do
So let me just give you the presentation mode. So okay, now you are able to share your screen.
So as I told you, we are, so Xavier Noel and Salvatore Campanella, we work together at the University of Brussels in Belgium. Both of us are psychologists, and we have a full permanent position of researchers. We work in a small lab among the Faculty of Medicine. The name of the lab is Lab of Medical Psychology and Addictions. Our boss, the head of the lab, is a psychiatrist, is Charles Conreich. And we are also a small lab, as I told you, because we are only 2 researchers with 2 currently PhD students that work with us. Personally, so my main topic is more devoted to the use of event-related potentials. And my main aim was to try to find EEG markers of alcohol abstinence versus relapse by triggering some cognitive functions. My experience with TDCS is really new and small. It's due to a very recent collaboration with Professor Chris Bakken, that probably you know. Is well known at the University of Ghent in Belgium, and he used TMS and TDCS mainly for major depression. And then we have a short study in which we try to investigate the impact of using TDCS on healthy participants in the EEG by doing before and after the TDCS go-no-go task. But this is not the topic of our meeting today. If you are interested by this paper, you can or send me an email, or you can go and take it in my ResearchGate profile. Here is the address. But the main topic today is probably that we started some months ago a clinical trial with TDCS that we applied to recently to alcoholic patients that are following detoxification cure. And the leader of this project is Xavier Noel, and then I will leave him the floor to introduce you that study.
Thank you, Salvatore. First of all, thank you very much for your invitation to take part in this conference. I'm very new in the field, so I apologize in advance for different things I'm going to tell you. The first thing is I would like to talk to you for just a few minutes about an ongoing project conducted here in Brussels, which tests the clinical efficacy as well as the possible cognitive and affective moderators and mediators of an intervention combining electric stimulation, TDCS, and specific cognitive inhibition training in recently detoxified alcoholics. So the timing of the assessment is important. It is a protocol that takes place just before discharge from the hospital. The patients are still in treatment for an alcohol detoxification program. Most of them just leave the hospital and return home with a psychiatric, in best cases, psychiatric and psychological follow-up of different kinds, day hospital or outpatient treatment, and a few are in residential area. So our design as 4 arms is very classic, to which 40 participants per conditions have been randomly assigned. It is a combination of sham and active conditions of TDCS and the active or inactive forms of the cognitive training of specific inhibition. So regarding the TDCS protocol, they write DLP FC. It's been stimulated. This is the area. This is the F4 during 20 minutes, 5 consecutive days from Monday to Friday. Regarding the training of inhibition, the participants undertake a task during which they will associate a motor response to a letter and the absence of motor response to another letter. In the experimental condition of the task, the motor response is systematically associated with images not related to alcohol, and conversely, the absence of motor response has been associated with neutral visual information. In the control condition of cognitive training, things are different because the degree of association go alcohol and no go alcohol is 50-50%. So it's still an ongoing study. To date, we are halfway to recruitment, but we expect the motivational and the affective properties of alcohol-related informations to be reduced to the active cognitive training condition, and even more so to the combined condition. Changes in affective properties and automatized responses, inhibition, and or craving in response to cues and stress induction procedure could be effective mediators and of the relationship between our combined method and alcohol relapse short term. This is what I have to say.
Great. Thank you very much for your presentation, Salvatore. Is there any question from Javier and Salvatore?
So I have a question. So where you talked about putting the you're simulating the right ELPFC. Where are you? I assume that means you're putting the anode there. Where are you putting the cathode?
One is at the right dorsolateral collapse prefrontal cortex. The other one is in the neck.
Any other question? Okay, good. So the next speaker would be Tifei from Shanghai. Tifei, please. First of all, what time is it right now in Shanghai?
11:30. So half an hour to midnight.
Oh.
Yeah.
So let me just.
So how should I share my screen?
Just now you can share your screen right now.
Okay. So everyone see it? Yeah.
Yeah.
So basically, Tifei, I'm from Shanghai Mental Health Center, and
Tifei, and you have 10 minutes from right now.
Yeah. Okay. So I would like to mention that it's a really big psychiatric hospital. We have more than 2,000 inpatients daily and 800,000 outpatients per year, which is the largest psychiatric hospital in the world. And also the addiction rehab center is quite good in China. We have per province, we have 10 to 20 centers, and in each center we have thousands of subjects. So it's really nice to collect the subjects from the centers. And to start, we have a system to measure the cortical plasticity in different patients, because we have another lab on animal study, so we actually can measure a lot of synaptic plasticity on different animal models. So first thing, we use TMS as a tool to measure the synaptic plasticity, and we have published paper to measure the methamphetamine and heroin subjects to see that they have cortical plasticity changes in after periods of addiction. So you see that in healthy subjects, which is the black line, you have the motor cortical plasticity with 10 Hz induction, but with methamphetamine or heroin addiction, you actually lose it. And so we actually promote this onto other cortical areas by TMS EEG study. So we actually combine the navigated TMS together with the EEG recording. We can actually prove different cortical plasticity changes. So basically, with single TMS pulse stimulation, we can actually record different changes in every cortical areas. So with this, we can actually detect potential changes in different cortical areas, and this would act as potential targets for our future intervention. And to just give you a brief example, this is the results from the heroin subjects. So in control subjects, you actually see the TMS evoked potentials, the TEPs. You can see the potentiation between the blue and red trace, which is the potentiation of LTP-like plasticity of TEP, but which is actually diminished on the heroin subjects. So this would act as a potential target for TMS treatment. So also we are also looking at the dynamic of different like craving changes or cognition changes during the abstinence, for example, over like 2 years. And we can actually map the dynamics of the craving and, for example, impulsivity changes during this long withdrawal period. And we are also measure different attention bias, SSRT, stop signal, or working memory data from different withdrawal lengths. For example, you can see the MS means a short withdrawal period for methamphetamine, and ML means the long withdrawal period. And you could see the difference between the methamphetamine subjects and the healthy subjects, but in different period of abstinence, you do not see much change between the short and long period ones. So we actually try to use these different cognitive tasks as potential biomarkers for TMS treatment prediction. So basically, we try different ways of TMS intervention on different addiction subjects. So in China, we have different opioid dependence. For example, the chronic heroin subjects, which they use heroin for a really long time. So in almost 3 years ago, we tried to use TMS to treat the heroin subjects, and we see craving changes. And then we also try this on a large number of methamphetamine subjects, and we found that if we do this in like 30 days, we try 20 times treatment, and we could see the long-lasting change, which will, after treatment, you see the difference will last at least for 2 months. So this is really evidence that you can induce some changes that will last after the treatment. And on the recently, we also published a paper showing that because we know that from the cortical plasticity measurement, we actually see that the female subjects, they actually react differently to cortical plasticity due to the hormone effects to the acute treatment. However, with the chronic treatment, we do not see such difference And so this is a pure group of female subjects of methamphetamine dependence, and we do see similar effects of TMS treatment. So maybe there is a minor difference in clinical treatment between male and female subjects, and this is something I really would like to mention. And on the other hand, we also try to target the withdrawal period. I mean, acutely from the abstinence. For example, in the methamphetamine abstinence, the patients couldn't sleep, and basically we can try use the TMS to improve their sleep and reduce their withdrawal symptoms. And this is together with the improvement in anxiety and depression score. So basically, we believe that the TMS treatment at the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex could actually improve different cortical circuits. And you see together many changes, including craving, including anxiety, depression, sleep, and cognition. So there might be many things to study further. And on the other hand, we also recently tried to improve the speed of treatment. So we know that the 10 Hz is like slower, and we believe that circuit burst stimulation is something maybe faster. I have been discussing this with Colin before. So TBS is something much faster. And also we now try to apply TBS 2 times a day, and which is separated by 6 hours. And so if you do this for 5 days, you get 10 sessions, and instead of 20 days, you can do this only for 5 days for 10 sessions. And we do see similar amount of craving reduction and cognition improvement with this TBS 2 times a day. And the side effects is actually tolerable. So we think there might be something can be faster. And if we apply the 2 times TBS per day, we can try something much faster, and we know the result in 5 days. And also we try a little bit on, for example, the TDCS modulation now. So we have a previous paper showing that if we suppress the bilateral frontal parietal temporal region with TDCS, we can actually suppress the craving in heroin subjects. So the clear mechanism is something really unknown, but we actually see that if you suppress the FPT region, you actually enhance the frontal region activity. So that might be something similar to TMS treatment, but the detailed mechanism is still unknown. And we also now recently received the H coil from Abraham, and we try to initiate the collaboration so that we receive the H7 coil, which will touch the anterior cingulate cortex, and we might to use this on heroin and methamphetamine patients. And this is our coming plan. So thank you for attention. And I do wish to mention you that we have many resources, and we wish to collaborate and share our resources with everyone.
Awesome, Tife. Thank you very much. It was really good. Any question from Tife?
So I guess I'll speak up. So Tife, thanks. So good to have you here. And that was a ton of data. And I really enjoyed our talk the other day. 2 things about your data I think are particularly interesting are the potential gender differences that you found, which I think you had mentioned to me were phase of the cycle dependent. So I don't know that we have enough time on this call to get into that, but it would be really interesting to know if the guys that have involved in motor cortex plasticity work with TMS have also found like phase dependent effects, menstrual phase dependent effects on cortical excitability. And then the other thing, which I think it aligns with a lot of what I know about some people on this call are doing, is the idea of stacking sessions of TMS in a single day. So Nolan's group and with Dr. Spiegel, they're doing a ton of TMS in a single day, many sessions. I know the NIH crew is also doing that. I'm hoping that at the Brainstem meeting in Vancouver, there are some symposiums about sort of critical windows. Paul Fitzgerald. We don't have any Australian representatives on this call, but the Australians are doing a lot of good parametric work, trying to figure out what the optimal temporal window is between individual TMS sessions.
Yeah.
So I'm just throwing that out there. It would be great to learn more.
Yeah. So for the first one, we actually know that the acute CTBS effect on female is really dependent on their hormone cycles. So if they're on the first day of their cycle, they actually react different to CTBS compared to male subjects. But during the period or after that, they become similar, or the plasticity is becoming similar. So we think there is something shifting. It's similar to what has been reported with 10 Hz stimulation on TMS, multicortical plasticity. However, on the chronic treatment, we know that the gender effects or the hormone-dependent effect might be minor, because during the day-to-day like accumulation of the stimulation effects, the cortex might be finally still be potentiated or somewhat. This is something we never checked, and we do not really understand. The second question is how many times can you give per day? Because I was talking to someone from John Roswell lab, and they were telling me that if you give CTBS like 10 minutes apart, you actually can enhance the CTBS effects, such as inducing LTD. But we try to give this like 6 hours apart. So we actually we believe that the CTBS effects should be washed out. And the longest time interval we tried with MEP recording is actually just 1 hour. And we do see that CTBS will last for 60 to 90 minutes, but we never try anything longer. And we never know, can you like repotentiate again after an hour or 2 hours? This is something, it's really difficult to try, because even the motor threshold is changing. You have dynamic of the motor threshold during the day, and many things are changing. So you are not really giving the same amount of CTBS protocol 2 hours later if you are given on the same motor threshold. Yeah.
Really interesting.
Just I will comment on this very nice booming. You know that there are actually preclinical studies, very important ones, even on brain slices, indicate that if you don't wait enough between the sessions, you do not induce long-term changes in plasticity. And they even show the mechanism for this. There are some studies actually showing that you have to wait enough in order to an accumulation of the neuroplastic effects. This I can send you. I think that there is one TNAS paper, very good one from like 2 or 3 years ago.
I totally agree, because on brain slice we also do a lot, and we know that if you induce 1 LTP, you actually occlude everything later. And if you induce the LTD, you actually can repotentiate that after. And this is purely on brain slice. But in vivo is something maybe different, and I don't know. I mean, we never tried, but we try to separate the 2 sessions longer than like 1 hour at least. Yeah.
And if I may say something, also in regards of the duration of the effects of CTBS or ITBS on MEP size, it might differ also what we observe in healthy subjects as compared to patients. That's something that we observe in adults with autism. I mean, it has nothing with addiction, but the effects last much longer than our control groups. So if we think about patients that are using cocaine and that kind of stuff, it might be also different from healthy subjects.
Yeah.
For depression.
Any other comments or questions from other attendees? Okay, great. So the next speaker would be Vincent from France. Vincent, do you want to go ahead?
Yes, of course. Can I share my screen?
Yes, just a second.
So hello everybody, I'm Vincent Van Was. I'm professor of neuroscience at the University of Franche-Comté in France. I'm going to present briefly some data, preclinical data we obtained in our animal model of TDCS. Can you see the screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, okay,
yes.
Perfect. So in your lab, one objective is to develop innovative technologies to treat psychiatric disorders, such as non-invasive neuromodulation tools. We are studying in particular two techniques, repeated transcranial magnetic stimulation and transcranial direct current stimulation, TDCS. Today I'm going to focus on TDCS. In order to better understand the mechanism of action of this technique, we have developed an animal model of TDCS. This was done in collaboration with a biotech company here in Besançon, in France, Dixi Medical. Our model is based on clinical protocols. The anode is placed over the frontal cortex, 1 millimeter anterior and 1 millimeter left from bregma. The reference electrode is placed over the thorax. We stimulate at 0.2 milliampere for 20 minutes, twice a day, for 5 consecutive days. For sham animals, the exact same procedure was used, but the current is not delivered. The first drug of abuse we have tested in our animal model was nicotine. We have shown that TDCS decreases both the depressive-like behavior induced by nicotine withdrawal during the adolescence and the rewarding effect of nicotine. This was published in Neuropsychopharmacology in 2014. Then we have evaluated the impact of TDCS on cocaine effects. In collaboration with Einsteiner from the Chicago Medical School, we have shown that TDCS reduces both behavioral and molecular effects of cocaine. At the behavioral level, TDCS attenuated cocaine-induced locomotor activity and the rewarding effect of nicotine. We have also evaluated gene induction by cocaine in the cortex and the striatum using in situ digitation histochemistry. As you know, this 268 is a marker of activity, and it also plays a role in cocaine-induced neuroplasticity. TDCS decreased ZIV268 induction in sensory motor and associative sector of the striatum. You have here the striatum with cocaine injection on the first line, TDCS, then cocaine induction in the second line. And as you can see, after TDCS, the ZIV268 induction was lower. Interestingly, this was lower in several sectors of the striatum, sectors that are involved in habit formation and compulsive behaviors. Finally, we have also evaluated the effect of TDCS on the rewarding effect of alcohol and on alcohol consumption. This work has been done in collaboration with the team of Professor Michael Nassilia in Amiens, here in France. We trained the mice to self-administer alcohol. Then we stimulate half of the mice, and all animals were subjected to an extinction procedure. After this period, the relapse was evaluated. As you can see on this chart, TDCS robustly decreases the relapse after the extinction procedure. This preliminary data seems promising for alcohol-dependent patients who would like to reduce their alcohol consumption. In conclusion, our animal our model has a translational value and will be useful to further evaluate the mechanism underlying the effect of TDCS on addiction-related behaviors. The perspectives are first to improve the parameters of stimulation to obtain greater effect of TDCS, and also to better understand the neurobiological mechanism that contribute to the beneficial effect of TDCS on addiction-related behavior, targeting the reward system and the prefrontal cortex. And we would like to use different kind of techniques such as voltammetry, gene expression assessments, especially in the basal ganglia, and electrophysiology approach. Thank you.
Thank you, Vincent. It was great. Any question from Vincent?
If you restrain the animal during stimulation, do you see like side effects such as like a stress or anything? Because that's the problem. If we use TMS for small animals, we have to hold the animal and they get restraint stress.
Of course, it is a really good question because restraint stress, the restraint box are a model of chronic stress. So yes, so we have different approach. We have an approach when we can use TDCS with anesthetized animals and or with restraint in the restraint box. And actually, we don't have that much side effects. We have done some control to see what happened with or without the restraint box. And the restraint box, the content, the application of the restraint box does not induce change in the behavior. We have tested that in different behavioral tests, such as the forced swim test and different kind of tests, and it seems there is not that much side effect. Actually, they are stressed during the first stimulation, but after you have an habituation to the restraint box, and then after a while they are going directly by themselves to the restraint box. So it's not a big problem. And the problem is we use also anesthetized animal and with isoflurane, and we have seen that isoflurane have antidepressant effects by itself, and also induce CPOS expression in several areas. So there is an interaction when you want to look at what happened in the basal ganglia, and we have discussion in the lab on this topic. But for me, I stay on the restraint box.
Any other question?
Just one comment on this about doing it in awake animals or using isoflurane. So I just want to bring your attention that we have published a study in Journal of Neuroscience showing the effect of TMS, not TDCS, in anesthetized versus awake animals, and you see very different effects, whether the animal is anesthetized or awake. And we also measured in that case BDNF levels, and the restraint itself in the awake animals that you have to do by itself because of the stress caused some increase in the BDNF levels. And then we looked also at the TMS effect from this, but absolutely there's going to be a very big difference between doing brain stimulation in awake versus anesthetized animals when you look at the biochemical outcomes and behavioral ones, I would guess too.
For sure.
Great. So our next speaker would be Dr. Colin Hanlon, who is my kind of co-chair of the meeting today. And we, if we can name a chair for that, but yeah, just and the Colin is basically doing a great job in terms of putting together the section regarding the clinical outcome measures for clinical trials that we do with TMS and tES in the INTAM consensus paper. And she's going to talk about, I mean, what we have been discussing about this issue, and then the things that she might feel that would be interesting to discuss, and we can discuss about those issues after her talk as well. Colin, please.
Yeah.
Just I'm going to.
Thanks.
Do you like to share your screen, or are you going just to talk about the things that you like?
I'm just gonna talk. Is that okay? I'll use my hands or things.
And just kind of, Vincent, would you just turn off your presentation? I mean, your screen sharing. Okay, awesome. Colin, please.
Great. Awesome. So yes, so thanks. Actually, before I forget, I wanted to, since Bhumi has given a lot of answers to things in the last 5 minutes, I think some people on the call might not know who he is. So Bhumi, could you introduce yourself to everyone first?
Sure. So I'm Bhumi Zangan, Abraham Zangan, my official name Abraham, but everyone who knows me more than 2 minutes knows that I'm Bhumi. And I'm a full professor at the Ben Gurion University, and also a founder, scientific founder of BrainsWave, which so I was actually developing H coils, the deep TMS coils, and this was licensed to a company named BrainsWave, and then I joined there as being a consultant. So I also have a role in the company as a consultant and as a scientific founder, but I'm a full-time professor in the Ben Gurion University. I work both in animal models and in humans, doing brain stimulation for many years. And what else should I say? I mean,
that's great.
And we have few others that recently joined us without the introduction. Michael, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself? We cannot hear you.
I was the one that introduced myself on the phone. I'm at Kentucky. We're just combining pharmacology with brain stimulation, multiple modalities, looking at complex behaviors using reinforcement learning, blah, 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 blah.
Awesome. Okay, so now we can see you as well. Okay, good. Do we have
I came out of the hole.
Okay. Do we have any other kind of people who like to introduce themselves? Okay, Colin, please.
Okay. And then another update is that hopefully many of you will be attending the brain stimulation meeting in Vancouver. And if you haven't been to the meeting, it's a great meeting. This will be the 3rd time we're having the meeting. And we have kind of gotten permission to hold a little INTAM consensus group or just INTAM group meeting at the conference. So Mark George kind of gave me that update yesterday. So we're still trying to find an exact time and location, but we're going to kind of work on that. If any of you have like a strong preference that you absolutely want to be there and you can't be there at time A or B, if you would just email Ahmed or I, we can take that into consideration when we try to plan. That'd be great. And as soon as we
just don't do it in the last day.
Sorry, the last day. So great. So in terms of the my assignment, which was to for this consensus paper I mentioned a second ago, I'm going to blame Ahmed for he assigned me with the colossal task of aggregating sort of dependent measures for addiction. So what should we choose? As if I know. But I have done addiction research for a while, and our lab has moved from doing kind of basic science, sort of proof of principle, what we would now call like target identification studies, to more now into clinical trials in a more formal way. And I will admit that has been a gigantic learning curve for me. And I'm still learning, and I'm in the process of like being audited by all these people all the time, and it's complicated. So I want to tell you a little bit about what I've learned and how we've written the consensus paper thus far, and then to kind of get everyone's opinion. So from the FDA perspective, so I actually, Mark George is my mentor, and as many of you know, he was part of the FDA pivotal trial that led to TMS being approved for depression. And, from some perspective, what we want, and Bhumi will talk a little bit later, he has probably more experience than anyone else that I know of in this domain on this call. We need to find a target. So the gold standard would be to find a dependent measure that can be then used to go to the FDA and to say, here, look, we have an intervention. So at least in the US, we'd want it to be FDA approved. And then once it's FDA approved, we'd want to be have it used and distributed, which in the US is a whole other layer of insurance. But as scientists, we can contribute to is at least up to the FDA statement, right? Like, how do we design a good protocol, et cetera. For addiction, thus far, for almost all the substance use disorders, the FDA metric is consumption. So for smoking, they've been, and again, I'm not an expert here, so please chime in if you know more than me, because you probably do. But for smoking, they've been pretty strict about having abstinence criteria. So you need to quit smoking. You can't just be what we would call harm reduction. In the alcohol world, they're actually a little more flexible. And so it used to be just abstinence, so you had to quit. And now it does seem that a viable FDA marker is, or indicator is sort of a reduction in drinking, and that's operationalized in some ways. So kind of the alcohol group has sort of endorsed what we would call harm reduction, whereas smoking still seems to be an abstinence-based policy. Cocaine was another big one, at least in the US, and we don't have any FDA-approved interventions, even medications. So in some ways, FDA kind of indicates that they would also like abstinence, but in my conversations with them, they've indicated that we just have to prove to them as a community that this is important. Which as a scientist, that feels very squishy, and I don't really like that. But so there's this one domain for all of us when we design clinical trials with our intervention, whether it's TDCS alone or in combination with cognitive therapy, which somebody on that call mentioned earlier. They're really interested in combining stimulation with cognitive behavioral therapy or some form of psychotherapy. I think that, in my opinion, the field is moving that way, and that will probably be what ends up being a most effective intervention. But then there's all of us that aren't, like, we don't have gigantic grants to do big multi-site studies to change consumption. Consumption's hard to do. And so there are secondary markers that we might want to target. And those things are, so my bias, which has been a really interesting thing to see as this consensus paper has come out. My bias is to look at cue reactivity and craving as a dependent measure. So there's actually very good evidence to suggest that craving is sort of a transdiagnostically relevant metric, which basically is associated with relapse. So higher craving levels, either pre or pre-treatment, will lead to people having higher relapse rates. You can look at that in the brain with something called cue-elicited craving. And so many of us, some of us on this call, will put people in an MRI scanner or perhaps EEG and look at cue-evoked craving. So that's another option as like a secondary biomarker that a lot of people in the field of substance use are using. So a primary marker that we should all eventually target is consumption, but it's hard to change consumption. A secondary marker that I would argue we should target is craving, or potentially cue-evoked craving. And then another domain, which is equally as important as craving, is cognitive control, decision-making, and the sort of allied executive functions that surround that, right? Response inhibition, ability to withhold the response, the ability to shift your set. I'm not a cognitive expert, so I just kind of wanted to reach out to you all. We've gotten some good feedback in the consensus paper from people that are working in that field. But if any of you all have some like strong opinions of what you think, in addition to cue-elicited craving, might be a valuable evidence-based dependent measure we could focus on, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Does anyone have like their favorite task or something that hopefully has a lot of evidence to suggest it's related to real world use and relapse?
Well, if I may, I would prefer Q-elicited paradigms than just a standardized questionnaire. You know, yes, I'm craving, no, I'm not craving. Yes, I feel like smoking is cigarette, etc. Because I do think that it's more, and I think these come from studies, people doing work in addiction, not brain stimulation. Basically, what is being said is that it's more related to, you know, if you relapse because of social and or environmental cues, you know, friends that they're drinking coffee at the smoke, and that's more often when they will relapse. And Q-elicited paradigm is closer to that than just a standardized questionnaire. So we, in my lab, we do both, just to make sure. But it's easier to, I feel the craving is moving more. I mean, you see more changes with the Q-elicited paradigm than the standardized questionnaire. So,
yeah.
Great.
So I have a question. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, just in terms of the Q-elicited craving, there is an ongoing discussion right now in the kind of Enigma addiction group in terms of kind of discussing about potential kind of consensus on a list of tasks that the Enigma group would recommend people to use for their trials in the future, in terms of kind of doing kind of they are interested to do task-based FMR. What are the tasks that they recommend people to do for addiction studies, and especially addiction kind of based trials? And there is a specific ongoing discussion in terms of what could be the ideal scenario for a kind of Q-elicited kind of fMRI task, and even what would be the ideal kind of Q database, because you know that in many kind of sorts of drugs we do not have at least published kind of versions of pictorial cues that people like to, and each lab basically developed its own type of database, and most of those labs they have not. They usually share those databases with other labs, but there is no specific kind of formal publication of the validation process. And we have, I mean, we have recently kind of finished a Q validation process for both meth users and heroin users and prescription opioid users, with something like 360 pictorial cues. And we are moving forward to publish that in kind of coming weeks. So it would be, I mean, if people are getting interested to do Q-elicited kind of fMRI or even some kind of behavioral paradigms, it would also be interesting to discuss about what could be the ideal, let's say, kind of features of those cues, and what would be. And you know that there are, I mean, there is a huge level of variation in terms of the tasks that people have. And you know that even the simple timing things would make a huge difference in terms of how much activities you can see in different parts of the brain with Q kind of exposure, when you just kind of increase the size of the block or other kind of really minor things would change the pattern of activations that you would kind of end up in seeing in your data analysis. So that would be something that we probably can discuss. And there are already some ongoing discussion of the other groups to see how we might be able to have a sort of consensus on Q-elicited kind of fMRI or other types of tasks in the field of addiction.
Yeah, so I guess I would say that I agree. I think we can probably agree that like there's some basic things. So most tasks thus far, Q-elicited craving and that scanner. Many of them use block designs, which we could have a discussion as imagers if that's sort of the optimal way to elicit a boulder. Some people are starting to tailor the individual, which I think is a really good movement. I was just talking to Brian Knudsen about that at Stanford, and we do alcohol studies, for example, and in our lab we show everybody the same cues. And they include like wine and beer and bourbon, because we're in the South. But not everybody's going to respond to all that. And so ideally, we should tailor them to the individual. You could get really kind of impressive, and you could have people go out into their own environment and take pictures of things that are uniquely tailored to them. So I think these are all like really fun ideas that are out there. And I think this is going to come up later in our discussion, is that there's probably some balance between having a sort of government regulated, like this is what you should use and this is the standard, but not getting in the way of creativity and innovation on the behalf of the individual. So I think that's a theme in science at the moment. But it'll be interesting. The intensity, your neutral images should be, matched kind of needed.
And I agree with you, Colleen, that we also need to visualize maybe some stimuli, because so from the first studies that we did with nicotine addiction in our group, we recruited, it was our first study, so we recruited smokers who didn't wish to quit, so just smokers, and we just craving and the number of cigarettes that they smoke, proof of concept studies, and craving was great. I mean, we saw a nice decrease of craving before and after stimulants and TDCS. And in our last study, we included subjects who wanted to quit. And when they see the pictures of smokers, they're like, oh, this is gross, I want to quit. And they don't react the same and don't see as much changes in craving. Yeah. I think, in regards to where the patients are, if they want to quit or not, it's in the age. And this can result in 15 sessions of stimulation with patients. So I think that we need cue-assisted paradigms, but also validation of how they feel about the stimuli. So, yeah.
Just one comment on this too. I would like to say, I think, Colin, actually in your area, there is a great method for inducing provocation or a craving in opioid. The group of Susie Beck and Kathleen Brady or something. And I think once a paper like they published is out there, we should try as a group to use similar paradigms so that we can compare and accumulate data on the same way. So I agree with you, we cannot have a government-regulated way of using craving, because it all depends on the specific question of your study. And particularly when you do imaging, you want to have a very acute craving, maybe to see faster. If you do EEG, of course you want to induce a faster effect than when you use craving for a clinical study, and then you have all the time in the world. But we do have to, I think, try to be aware of the literature published, and there are not so many paradigms that were validated and published like the one from your group there in South Carolina, that we are going to, I'm going to say, we're going to use this, for example, because this is the only published paper on a validated method to induce provocation in craving in opioids, so we took this one. But I think we strive to standardize the method so that we can compare between studies of this worldwide.
That's great. And that's a great use of this group, right? Is to talk and communicate about things like that. Like, thanks for bringing that study to our attention. I get that. That's great.
Sorry, I have just a short comment at this point. Just wanted to know, just wanted to draw your attention to the fact that virtual reality of immersive environments with a great sense of agency, when people decide to move, based on their own intention, but virtually, in a bar or something like that. And I'm more familiar with the gambling literature, and in this literature, it says promising to use virtual reality protocols in order to induce craving. But when assessing craving, I think it makes sense to differentiate automatic parts of the craving, which presumably is related to the fact that you load images of desire unintentionally, automatically in working memory area, and more elaborative aspects of craving. You know what I mean? And this theory has been well supported, in my opinion, by work conducted by May and Kavanagh from the University of, which university it is? Sheffield, UK. And you will see that under the sorry for that, but elaborated intrusion theory of craving, I think. And we have a questionnaire. There is also a questionnaires that break down different aspects, you know, of what craving is, automatic versus non-automatic. They also, as you know, of course, physiological basis of craving, skin conductance, heart rates, and that kind of things. But I think virtual reality and with a great sense of agency for these people is very promising. I mean, in my opinion, I'm sure it's not very appropriate in the setup of a brain imaging technique or something, but for clinical studies, it might make great sense. Might make great sense. Another thing is the CINA procedure. You know, when you ask people to re-experience mentally something very personal in relation to craving or in relation to a stressful situation. And if I remember well, they found very huge elevation from 0 to 35 in 100 in terms of craving score, craving elevation. So this is the kind of things we have been using.
That's great. And that actually kind of imagining or re-exposure is very similar to the paper that Bumi is referring to, done by Kathleen Brady and Sudhi Bhatt, where they sort of incorporate the techniques of exposure therapy into craving provocation.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And I'll say, you know, our new R01, we're using cocaine cues in the context of probabilistic decision-making tasks for both drug commodities and non-drug commodities. So, you know, we have a drug image that is probabilistically reinforced or rewarded over time. We have a non-drug image that's probabilistically reinforced over time. And we are doing a mixed event-related block design in the scanner. And then, you know, we have different ratios of payouts on those cross commodities. So 6 to 1, 1 to 3, 3 to 1, 1 to 6. And what you're doing is, you know, and the stimuli themselves are changing size of the screen. They're all matched for luminance. But what we're doing, right, is we're looking at learning rates. We're using reinforcement learning models to say what are the rates that you're learning and switching when the rules switch. So in a way, it's got a little bit of, you know, cognitive flexibility, plasticity, but these are drug-related cues. And individuals will also have neutral cues and perform that task. They'll also be performing the task in the scanner getting IV cocaine. So in addition to money being the primary, secondary reinforcer for both cue types, we're going to have a condition where individuals are making choices for IV cocaine in the scanner. So this gets at a little bit of what everybody's talking about, especially this new emphasis on harm reduction at the level of the SCA. So as a secondary measure, you might think about it being a decision-making measure, but also, like you were saying, with cue reactivity or with craving, you know, there's multiple ways to get at craving. There's multiple ways to get at decision-making. So if you start looking at cross-commodity decision-making, the choices away from cocaine-related cues towards more economically viable ones or learning under those contexts, I think all those should be considered as secondary measures. There's also ways to combine the things that we're talking about into to single or multiple tasks to address you know, addiction in general.
Great. Any other specific comment? Please go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to make a plug for, especially in the trials that are going to be doing longer term follow-up of folks and using it as an actual treatment for a measure of the severity of the clinical disease. So the scale that looks at just basically gives a visual analog for each one of the criteria in DSM, or, you know, something that captures the loss of control over the drug use. Because I think that's the key feature of addiction, and that's where we're seeing changes as we're treating the cocaine guys, especially. And I think we really need that will help us to make a good argument to the FDA that something other than abstinence is a relevant outcome.
Betty Jo, do you have a suggestion on what we should use?
I'm blanking on the exact name of it, but there is one that just is basically a visual analog scale on each one of the criteria, the DSM criteria. and then we've got an internal one that we're working with now, but that's probably not quite ready for prime time yet. But.
Well, if you guys get some that you really like and you want to send it to us, we can send it around.
Yeah, good.
Awesome. That is great. Any other comments about the outcome measures? Okay, the next speaker would be, Dr. or Professor Zangan from Israel, and Bumi, you're the
Right. Is Aaron here? Because Aaron was supposed to join and present this with me. Aaron, are you listening or?
No, I can. Do we have Aaron right now with us? I cannot see him right now.
Okay, so I will do that. Actually, I very liked Colleen's presentation. I did it last time. I also did not use any PowerPoint and just had an open discussion. This time I did something, and so I need to share the screen. Can you?
Sure.
Should I just click it now, or
no? Just wait for a second.
And so I will. So what I will just try to.
Okay. Now you can share your screen.
Okay, let's see. Let's see. Is it working?
Not yet.
You see my screen?
Okay, good. Yes.
Okay, so I thought just to share with you a process that led to now a multi-center study in opioid use disorder. Well, some of you know that we started all this in animals, and we actually the concept of the being able to change addictive behavior by brain stimulation, we first presented this in rats. We continue to do this work in rats, but in this case, I want to share with you, and we did a smoking study before, but I wanted to share with you here a process that led to a study in opioid use disorder. And as you mentioned before, to make a center study, this is very complicated. You really need funding for that. And for that, to get funding, you need very strong feasibility data. So we got to this opioid study that is going to be FDA regulated and won some FDA challenge to follow up with us. I will show you later about this. This actually started with a different study that by the equivalent of the NIH in Europe. It's the European Research Council Horizon 2020 grant that I received together with Marcus Heilig and others to look at alcohol use disorder. And this is a study where we compare either stimulation of the insular cortex and or the prefrontal and anterior cingulate cortex. So it's two different types of designed to reach deeper and also stimulate larger volumes of the brain. And we compare these to sham. So I want to briefly go through this study design, which was eventually the basis for the protocol that we submitted to the FDA. In this study, we have alcohol use disorder patients that are treated with high frequency. This is based on the earlier smoking cessation study that we published in Biological Psychiatry, and targeting either anterior cingulate again, or insula, or sham TMS. We have some imaging measures, fMRI, and we know that we have to induce the provocation, and I'll show you later maybe more why we think this is critical to activate the circuitry just prior and during the stimulation in order to make the effect more specific, particularly when the stimulation captures such a large volume of the brain. You want to be more specific about the pathological circuitry, and we know that activation of the circuitry makes the ability to change it more reliable. So the procedure is in this study is taking the first patients who are alcohol-free at baseline. They were alcoholics in the past years and months, but they have to be for 2 weeks sober, and take urine samples, of course, to measure whether they're really alcohol-free when they report so. So we confirm the reports by urine measures, and we take EEG and fMRI before and after 15 days of treatment. 15 days of treatment, 3 weeks. This was the protocol that we used also in the smoking cessation study, and this was also the protocol we started in with rats in a cocaine study. So this is the timeline, and the question of the study is whether the relapse rate, which is known to be very high even in patients who were sober for 2 weeks, we know that the relapse rates are huge. Within 3 months, in the literature, we see more than 50%, sometimes 80% of the subjects relapsing. And the question is whether TMS can reduce the relapse rate in this consortium study funded by the Horizon 2020. And not really a multi-center study, it's just 2 centers. It's in Israel and Marcus Heilig Center in Sweden. So I now will go very briefly through the interim analysis results, which led us to get funding from Brainway to do the opioid study. So just interim analysis results here. So this is now the interim analysis results only for the anterior cingulate. I will tell you confidentially, partly, that it looks like that the insular cortex stimulation is not doing much in alcoholics to prevent relapse, but the stimulation of anterior cingulate and medial prefrontal cortex is giving some positive signals. So here is the design now, and this is what we do also in other FDA-regulated study, where you have to have a very good sham control and blinding method. And in the case of the H coil, this is both coils, the active and the sham, are encased in the same helmet, and there is a magnetic card reader that selects the specific coil to stimulate. So there is each patient receives its own magnetic card by random, and would not know what this card is going to activate, the active or the sham. Neither the operator would know, or the raters, of course, the study PI. So this is a good method of blinding. Here you see the distribution of the electric field induced in the brain by the sham coil and by the H7 coil, and we compare these two. Now you see that we use the provocation of pouring alcohol beverage. This is individual for the subject, so each subject should mention which beverage is the most favorite one, and we use this just prior to the beginning of the stimulation. And the glass with the wine, with the specific beverages, stays on the table during the whole session. So activating the circuitry, we think, is necessary to induce the desirable effects. I'll show you in a minute the figure why we think so. So the protocol involves, again, 3 weeks, active versus sham, the provocation. So why provocation? I think the strongest evidence we have for this is, I'm not sure you're seeing my cursor. Do you see my cursor?
Yes.
A piece. Yeah. So it's a study. This is published in Brain Stimulation several years ago in PTSD patients, where in this case stimulation combined with a recall of the traumatic memory was the only way to induce reduction in symptoms. And when we gave TMS alone with sham recall, like no real recall of the traumatic memory, then TMS had no effect. This is not like in depression, where you don't need to activate the circuitry actively or do anything in psychological means. Here, the TMS itself, it's again, it's an H coil, did not do anything without combining it together with provocation. And then the right side here, you see just recall alone, just the script that recalls the traumatic memory by itself also is not doing much. So this is a brief exposure thing of the type of therapy, but in resistant PTSD patients, only the combination of the stimulation plus the activation of the relevant memory was the one that produced a reduction. This is baseline, this is after treatment. We saw some such signal less robustly also in our smoking cessation study published in Biological Psychiatry, at high frequency but not the low frequency induced reduction in cigarette consumption. And this was also confirmed by cotinine measures in urine. And here you see without the provocation relative to with the provocation. So this is not statistically significant, but also here you see a trend that combining the stimulation with the provocation produces a stronger change in the cigarette consumption. And finally, OCD study based on these two earlier studies, we did a multi-center in OCD, and I do think that there is a lot of common features between obsessive compulsive disorder and addictions. And in this OCD study, which was first a feasibility study and then a multi-center study, we used the provocation which was tailored for the patient in order to induce the obsessions and receive the nice effect comparing active and sham treatment. And this led to FDA approval already of these H7 coil for OCD. Okay, so in our alcohol study, we used the same paradigm as we did in the OCD, the same parameters and some imaging measures, and then now we'll go very quickly through some interim results we have so far. So here is the interim results. You see here a reduction in the percentage of binge drinking days, which was defined as the primary outcome measure, the clinical one, in the active versus the sham. This was not happening when applying the stimulation to the insular cortex. So it's the anterior cingulate and medial prefrontal cortex that induced this nice reduction. There is some placebo effect. You see also here the percentage of alcohol-free weeks and percentage of patients that fulfill each of these criteria. And you see that along the 100% of time, that at 3 months, most of the patients relapse in the sham group. Also, half of the patients almost in the active group as well, but there is a nice separation here. So this nice signal based on interim analysis of finally less than 40 patients led us to this opioid. No, one more. Here you see the craving measure, which was not the primary outcome measure, but the secondary. The 10 alcohol craving scale as a gold standard measure of craving in alcoholics. And you see also after the 3 weeks of treatment plus 1 more week, after 1 month, there is no big difference between the active and sham. So there is a very strong placebo effect. But nicely, we see here some incubation of the effect of the stimulation, that after 3 months, the craving comes back. So when the patients do not come daily to the clinic, craving comes back. But after 3 weeks of stimulation, we probably did induce some lasting change in the circuitry, and the craving is still lower in the active group. And this might explain the reduction of the relapse rates, as I showed earlier. Okay, so this plus a study performed by Diana Martinez in cocaine subjects using also the H7 coil and indicating that high frequency produces reduction in craving, led us to go for a multi-center study in opioids. So you would ask me, why not alcohol, why not cocaine? And the answer is financial. Simply, as you said before, in order to get the financial support to make a multi-center study, which is much more expensive than doing 2 centers with a European grant, and with all the FDA regulations, which makes the study very expensive, we need a very strong financial enforcement for that. And according to the experts in reimbursement and whoever in the company is more doing the analysis of the market, the opioid is the one that was doing a multi-center study for BrainsWay. This is not my decision, it's other people's decision. But based on the alcohol study and this small cocaine study and also the OCD study, we decided to go for the BrainsWay company, which is, owns the patents for the H coils, for the deep TMS H coils, decided to go for an opioid use disorder study and submitted the protocol to the FDA and even won. It was one of the 8 companies out of 250 applicants that for the FDA Innovation Challenge. BrainsWay was actually chosen the first one for the protocol that we decided to use. So just 2 words about this protocol and I will end. The opioid study objective is looking at the safety and efficacy of targeting, again, this the anterior cingulate and medial prefrontal cortex using high-frequency stimulation. And we are going for patients who are who are seeking treatment and do not want to remain on opioid agonist beyond the detoxification sufficient period. Now above 17 years of age. So we have active and sham. We screen, we plan to screen the patients within the first phase, and then go for buprenorphine Suboxone stabilization period. And because we know that relapse rates are huge in opioid heavy users, we do here a taper down period of the buprenorphine, of the Suboxone, over 3 weeks, and start the TMS, the deep TMS this period. Now adding, after 3 weeks, they have to completely stop taking the alternative opioid, the buprenorphine. The goal of the study is actually to get the patients not being dependent on an alternative opioid, but hoping that the deep TMS, like in the alcohol study, will allow them to reduce the craving and not come back to any of the opioids. So after 3 weeks of slow tapering down of the buprenorphine, we continue for additional 2 weeks daily TMS sessions, and for additional 6 more weeks, many TMS sessions, more than we did in any other study, because we know these patients are so severe. We continue for another 6 weeks, but here only 3 times per week. So this is the study design over 18 sessions, 3 months, just like we did in the feasibility alcohol study, and planning to compare the active and sham targeting the same area. The primary efficacy endpoint, following some discussion with FDA, is comparing the cumulative distribution function. So this is like looking at the percentage of time altogether that patients were opioid free. They're not looking for complete abstinence, but for change in so the more it's looking for the percentage of time along the 12 weeks of opioid free weeks based on the subjective reports, and of course the urine samples that we will take. You must have an objective measure as well. So unlike the smoking cessation study, as Colin said, they don't look, FDA is not requiring complete abstinence, but at least a reduction in the number of weeks where the urine samples are positive. The secondary efficacy, we look for also for withdrawal scale for the cows, whether the withdrawal symptoms are reduced, comparing the proportion of patients that achieve treatment success, like not relapsing, meaning at least 80% of the time they did not relapse, they would be considered a success, and also craving score as also a secondary efficacy. There are many exploratory endpoints which I will not detail here, but I think this is an example for a protocol, and here we have a protocol that was developed following earlier study in other addictions, and eventually was successfully, at least evaluated by the FDA as a good protocol for multi-center study.
Awesome.
That's it.
That was a great presentation. It's going to be a really exciting multi-centric trial to see what would be the result. And I'm sure that many people are essentially looking for seeing what would be the result of this really interesting, exciting trial. Is there a specific
Yes, and,
question among speakers? I mean, among the participants?
Just one more comment. I really hope that some of you will be part of it. I know that Colin and Mark George and also you, Mohammed, are going to be part of this. And we hope to get started within like 2 or 3 months. We'll touch.
Well, I have a quick comment. Bumi, I'm interested to know with your discussions with the FDA, what your primary safety outcomes are and how those discussions went. Because we've had recent discussions with them about trying to identify which safety parameters we would use to identify increasing use or too many bad outcomes, right? So I'm curious what your experience was.
Yeah, so the most important one is suicidal ideation. We do have to measure suicidal ideation. This was one of them. Seizures, of course, always TMS studies. Now, I have to check this out. Yeah, for this I need Aaron Tendler. There was another measure I think which was very critical, which related to the point. So once we see that they go back to, I'm not sure about how it is defined. We have to have a rescue plan where they can get access again for the Suboxone, for the buprenorphine. I don't remember how this is defined as a safety measure, but I'll try to, if Aaron is not on the line, I can't remember exactly what was it. But I can look for it and send it to you. What experience did you have with safety requests?
Oh yeah, I mean the FDA has never really been clear exactly what they want. They just say you need to have some safety outcomes. So we've had several discussions, and so we put some worsening of cocaine experiences, of course, seizure, and some cognitive measures, of course, to say we're not just changing behavior, but changing their cognitive abilities.
Okay, so suicidal ideation for sure is something which they want to know about, because once
we're checking suicidality and depression measures, but it wasn't an outcome measure, safety outcome measure. That's something we're tracking. So they wanted us to put something in that was specific to say X number of seizures we would stop.
Yeah, of course. This is always this is true for all TMS studies. FDA always want to know about the seizure rate, and you have to predefine what rate would mean you have to stop the study. Of course, but this is less of a risk in the case of opioid withdrawal, more risky in the case of cocaine users. Of course.
Yeah, potentially. Yeah.
Any other questions?
I'm going to have to run.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, yes. David, go ahead.
Yeah, I didn't introduce myself before. I'm David McMullen. I'm a program officer in NIMH, National Institute of Mental Health. But I think that there's sort of an analogy between the cue eliciting measures that Colin was talking about and the provocation measures that brain sway uses. And so I wonder if that might be an analogy where for OCD, the provocation is going to be patient specific, right, depending on their obsession. And so if that's a similar idea to the substance use disorders, then I think that might be a good analog to think of how FDA use it.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not sure I got your point. So you think we should individualize the provocation in the OCD study? Tailoring?
No, it's just drawing an analogy, like using the OCD study as a base, but then thinking about how the FDA might regulate individualized cue elicitation. And if anybody really feels like developing it, they do have a medical device development tool pathway that might be a way to standardize that, but that would probably be an entire company's worth of effort to do that. And the last one is really just to highlight how meeting early and often with the FDA can often be helpful when planning those final pivotal studies, just to make sure that the outcome metrics are agreed upon before starting.
Yeah, thanks, David. I think those are good points. And I actually think that's one of the great things about what we're doing here is we're talking to one another and hopefully kind of cross-fertilizing between what's been done in OCD in terms of tailoring or individual provocation stuff, what's been done in PTSD, which that's one of my favorite studies showing this sort of idea that cue, an environment that's kind of related to the cues amplifies the TMS treatment effect. So I think you bring up a good point. And for everybody that doesn't know David, he's the, correct me if I'm wrong, David, but he's the program officer that's associated with most of the neuromodulation grants at NIMH. Is that right?
Yeah, sorry, to give it a little bit larger introduction. So I'm in the NIMH Division of Translational Research that's led by Ali Lissambi, and my portfolio focuses on invasive and non-invasive device treatment for mental health disorders, also in the device development engineering pathway. I also help lead one of the brain teams focused on new methods for non-invasive imaging and brain stimulation.
Thanks.
Great. Any other question from Bhumi?
Okay.
Okay, great. So that is great. We still have just 5 minutes of time to kind of see what are the other things that we might be able to discuss. One of the things that we already have on the table among people who have been kind of leading authors in the INTAM consensus paper is basically a discussion about should we have something like a checklist of items that we like to ask people to report when they basically design or report a clinical trial using kind of neuromodulation and brain stimulation techniques in addiction medicine. And you know that there are already kind of different sorts of checklists for clinical trials, specifically in addiction medicine or in kind of behavioral interventions or some specific outcome measures in other kind of disciplines. And we have even been discussing about kind of developing something together. And there are people that they really like to have a checklist for the clinical trials, and there are people who think that that would basically reduce the level of freedom that people like to have in terms of the exploration that they might be able to do. So that is something that we probably kind of share with you guys in the next steps in terms of having your ideas as well. But just to give you an idea about what we have been kind of discussing about, I'm just going to give you an overview about the checklist that we have already kind of put together in something like a Delphi discussion group among kind of groups of colleagues here. Let me just share what we already have here, and here we go. Okay, so that is kind of the initial idea that we have been kind of discussing with a group of people, that we might be able to have a series of criteria from different perspectives, from just some kind of really general things that are focused to non-invasive brain stimulation, and items that might be specifically addiction-specific items. And we have been kind of discussing about different items that should be considered in developing a trial and reporting a trial. So we already have a kind of something like a list that we developed with a group of people. And we have been thinking to ask people to just, let's say, rate the items from something like 0 to 5 in terms of how much they are important in terms of kind of being reported. And we do not have a really strong opinion in terms of pushing people to do this in the field, but also thinking about how it might be informative for people who are newcomers to the field to consider some minor issues that might end up to some really kind of important things at the end of the day for a clinical trial. So that is something that we are already discussing with a group of people in INTAM, and we have been discussing about that with Colin as well. So there are still kind of lots of different kind of pros and cons how we might be able to do this in the future. But just to kind of give you a heads up, that will be something else that we we might be able to proceed together in a kind of INTAM networking activities. Colin, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that's great.
Okay, so that is something else that we probably would discuss again together and how we might be able to move forward for that. So we still have 2 minutes left. Do we have any comment or idea or something that you'd like to share?
I actually lost the beginning.
Great idea.
And I just wonder about the methodology of the consensus paper, because how to make order in the mess, so many people are working on the same version at once, and to make sure that
the plan
right way.
The plan right now is just we are asking lead authors to finalize their own sections based on I mean, what they prefer to keep and what they prefer not to add. Okay, so that is kind of the, so we basically gave a level of authority to each lead author that basically kind of lead that section to make a conclusion about the things that they like to keep in their section. And then in the next step, we put those finalized sections together to make a new draft. And in the new draft, we will circulate the new draft again to receive feedbacks from others. And then we will have something like a kind of smaller editorial group of people that we conclude about the final structure of the paper. And we definitely kind of share the final structure of the paper to receive another round of kind of feedbacks. And you know that, I mean, we really like to keep everybody really happy about what we are doing right now, but you can imagine that, I mean, there will always be something like a level of kind of accepted kind of disappointment from few people. And I think that kind of if we accept something like a 5% kind of level of disappointment in total among a large group of people, that would be acceptable at the end.
Still call it a consensus.
Yeah. So I mean, we will try to kind of, I hope that it would end up with a, I mean, 100% consensus, but we can still kind of keep doors open in terms of putting things that we do not have kind of a 100% consensus, something like items for further debates in the future. So we really like to put even if we do not have any specific consensus or something, we like to kind of put different ideas inside, just get sure that we have covered kind of various ideas that people have in the field. And then I think that in something like 4 or 5 kind of years, we are going to be back and reevaluate what we have been discussing in terms of kind of the outcomes that we have from different trials in the field. So I think that would be a process, but that will be something that you will really in the circulation, and you will have we will be able to kind of add your comments in the next steps. And meanwhile, others in the kind of INTAM networking activities, you will also receive kind of the updated version of the draft, and you will be highly welcome to kind of contribute and add your ideas inside.
Okay. Just a technical question, very short one. Just a technical question. What reference software are you using? Because I never.
EndNote.
EndNote. Okay.
Yeah, and if there is no concern about the kind of citation, because we basically, if you just refer to something, we will add that in the EndNote as well. I mean, if you add things in EndNote, you will make our life easier. But if you just like to, let's say, report the PMID number or anything else, we will kind of take care of that as well. Okay. Colin, do you want to add one? Please, yeah.
Just one thing. So my sort of thought about the consensus paper is, especially because we're a new sort of group, and this is our first writing thing together, is that we should, like, at first do no harm. And so I think the worst outcome of this paper would be that it would close doors to people that are already doing good research. So I think that's an important thing to channel. I think the tone of it should be welcoming and inviting and sort of guidelines. And then in my opinion, as the field matures, we could maybe like kind of get a little more narrow and become a little more of an authority. But right now, I think we need to build trust even just with one another. So we're, you know, I congratulate all the people that shared their data on the call today. That's awesome. And I think that we can be stronger.
Thank you very much, Colin. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today. We are hopeful to meet you in Vancouver in something like more than 1 month, and we will inform you about the next kind of level of networking activity. And we are kind of discussing with Colin and others to see how we might be able to make something like a website for INTAM to put different activities inside and let you guys to share what you are doing in different places across the world. And we are also discussing about potentials for finding specific funding resources for doing something together. I mean, in terms of doing a shared protocol across the board in different labs across the board. So that is another thing that we are right now discussing together. So if you are informing about any specific funding opportunity that would cover sort of kind of a joint international collaborative effort for doing something together, that would be great. So please keep us informed about that. And I hope that we will kind of meet you again very soon.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, Colin. Bye.
Have a nice day.
Bye-bye.